There has been a disturbing rise in the number of anti-Semitic incidents recently recorded in Australia. Over the past 2 years, Australia has had a 40% jump in anti-Semitic incidents. Almost 300 cases of verbal abuse or assault were reported between 2021 and 2022. One Jewish leader told The Australian those numbers were, quote, just the tip of the iceberg. Now, of course, this isn't just in Australia. News this week of US rapper Kanye West's potential visa troubles over previous anti-Semitic comments only brought this issue further into focus. Now, 77 years on, the horrors of the Holocaust loom large, and the lessons of this history have never been more relevant. And that's why on the 27th of January around the world, International Holocaust Remembrance Day is commemorated, and we stop to remember one of the most horrific events in human history. Well, joining me now from New York is US journalist and the author of How Could This Happen? Explaining the Holocaust, Dr. Dan McMillan. Dan, welcome to the show. The rise of anti-Semitic behaviour around the world is shocking. What do you think is behind this rise?
Well, thank you for having me, Caleb. I'm not sure, I think the pandemic, frankly, the pandemic has driven up crime rates, has driven up psychological problems, it's driven up every kind of problem around the world, as to what is causing the more recent spike in anti-Semitic hate speech and incidents. I don't really have a theory. On the other hand, I think it is, valuable to understand that the Holocaust is just not adequately taught. In our schools, in my country, out of our 50 federal states, 33 states do not have a legal requirement that the Holocaust be taught in schools, particularly the younger generation. People in their 20s and 30s, we're seeing very disturbing poll numbers about a lack of knowledge, basic knowledge about the Holocaust. So definitely, we do need better Holocaust education. I think that is something on which we all can agree.
Well, you've studied the horrors of the Holocaust for decades, obviously. I mean, do you think that as we move further and further away from that period in time and as more survivors pass away, we're essentially beginning to forget, and perhaps that's part of the reason it's not being taught?
That's possible, and a lot of people, it is, of course, very poignant that we are losing the direct, immediate testimony of the survivors. And I've spoken to, I guess, 3 survivors directly, and it is it's an amazing experience. But I think in some ways it can be, if we handle this right, that over time we actually come to a better understanding and study it more. And the reason I say this is that the Holocaust is the only event in history that truly frightens people. It's the only event that people have a desire and need to deny. And in some ways, I think that getting a little further away from the immediacy of the event may make it a little bit less frightening and more possible for people to look at it more directly and explain to people why it happened. I mean, one of the strange things about my book, it's the first and to date really only book that gives a digestible overview for the general public of all the many factors that caused the Holocaust to happen. Published in 2014, it should have been written 20 years before my book was written. I think one of the reasons that it took so long is that the Holocaust frightens us so much that people are ambivalent about understanding why it happened because we're afraid we may learn something about ourselves that we can't live with.
And that's the incredible thing, isn't it? I mean, 77 years ago, it wasn't all that long ago. This is recent history. Yeah. And that's why we have Holocaust Remembrance Day. It's commemorated around the world. Keeping that message going is important, isn't it?
It absolutely is. I think one thing that I would like to highlight that I most want every audience to understand that I think is often not really articulated, even by many people in the field who study it, what is distinctively, I think, horrifying about the Holocaust is that this is the only moment in history where the ruling class of an advanced society really decided that individual human life had absolutely no intrinsic value whatsoever. I mean, you see the cheapening of human life in every war or every massacre or genocide, but in the Holocaust, it was literally absolute. And that is so frightening that in a lot of ways, even the people who study it have not articulated that properly. And it took me decades to arrive at this insight. That's kind of the thing I most want people to understand about it.
Dr. Dan McMillan, thank you for joining me tonight.